Welcome to another episode of Keeping It Realty with Marc and Brian. So before we jump right into the show, big shout out to our show sponsor, East Brother Beer Company, located in Point Richmond. Love their beer. If you've watched the last few episodes, we've tried a red lager, an IPA. I believe we did a Baltic Porter, and now we're trying their oatmeal stout.
Actually, I've had this a couple times. It's one of my favorites. Every morning I have my oatmeal and egg whites, and so this fits right into my macros for those of you who know what I'm talking about. It's a great beer on top of that.
I'm a big fan of oatmeal stout because of this specific beer, because typically, like, I'm not a fan of stouts. Like, stouts tend to be super heavy for my taste, but this one is a really light one. I like the flavor of it too. They say rich milk chocolate flavor.
That's
Hints
what
of it.
I feel like.
You get that?
I'm gonna. It's like tastes like chocolate to me. That's why I like it.
Okay, so we're going to get right into it. We've got some great topics we're going to discuss today and a great property to analyze. So topic number one, we have the CASA Housing Plan. So for a quick little background, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission came out with a 10-point plan to essentially fix Bay Area housing crisis. Now, the problem with this is that they've never been involved in any type of housing policy. And why just focus on the Bay Area? Why not the entire state of California? I don't know. They were greatly criticized for it. And so they
And again,
basically...
just to emphasize that again, that's the transportation agency chiming in on addressing the housing crisis.
So they essentially were able to get this passed on to another organization that's now come out with this 10-point plan for housing, which involves just cause eviction ordinance throughout the entire Bay Area. They also talk about a 5% rent increase cap limit throughout the Bay Area, and there's a few other things. So, Brian, what's your take on this? I mean, is this something that we need?
Well, after hearing it for the first time, I didn't put a lot of credence in it. And then actually having to review it and read the policy, in preparation for the show, the more I don't like it. Again, a lot of it didn't seem as though they had anything new to offer. They were literally just pulling from various sources on various sources that we've already heard from before. And they were reemphasizing points that you always talk about, you always hear: rent control, just cause, certain caps of 5% with rent control. So the big part of that whole issue is that, one, that the transportation agency, so I don't know why they should have some say or authority on the housing issue or the demand for housing. But the big part of it that I thought was counterproductive was it makes it even more difficult to develop or build or to provide affordable housing. Again, the more supply you create, the more the prices will come down and will not go up. Rent control, although it's supposed to keep prices down, doesn't actually make the market rent go down because it restricts supply.
And to explain that, there's plenty of studies out there that show people will pay more for rent in a rent control complex as opposed to a non-rent control complex because they know that future rent increases will be very limited. Rent control also keeps people living in the properties longer, which sounds like a good thing. But at the same time, if you don't have a natural market of people moving in, moving out, what happens is you end up with a lot of people staying in their properties, not moving out, and that restricts supply.
Yeah, and that very instance right there of restricting supply makes rents more expensive. So, and again, if you create a cap where you can't even raise the rents in an entire city more than 5%, what that also does is it takes away a lot of the incentive for developers, people building new stock, to want to build because there's no profit in it. Not to mention there's all these teeth and restrictions that make it more difficult than it already is, which is extremely difficult to actually get plans approved for new housing or whatnot. So again, you're going to have this the whole goal of this is to keep prices down and to create more housing opportunities for people to live in. But at the same time, it makes it less profitable. It makes it less mathematically feasible to go build something new because it just makes it that much more difficult to get plans approved, and because of that, it makes it more expensive.
Now, one of the things they're trying to push with this 10-point plan is also, well, why don't we make developing properties a much easier process? The problem with that is, why do we need legislation when we already have that in place in the state of California? What we need to do is just start enforcing that and not let cities prevent developers build something that falls within their plans.
That was the whole thing. Is they were saying they want to make it easier to develop. However, when you read between the lines, you're like, this is actually not going to help it become easier to develop. It's actually going to make it harder.
Not just that, but we also have, if you look at the counties and the cities that actually support this, well, it's not surprising that you have cities like Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco, Richmond that support it. They already have many of these policies already in place. But all the cities and the county jurisdictions that don't have these in place, guess what? They don't want it. And for them to have something imposed at a statewide level that's not even statewide, it's just for various Bay Area counties, it's not something that they want. And so I think there's going to be a lot of opposition to this. I think I just don't see this working out.
No, neither did I.
So next topic is Zestimates and the future of appraisals. So thought you had the sound off.
I thought I did too.
Okay, so recently, a judge threw out a Zillow antitrust lawsuit over the placement of price estimates. And it's funny. There's a lot of love. There's a lot of hate with Zestimates. I see a lot of clients that really stick to those Zestimates as if they're worth, it proves their equity and proves that their property is worth more than what it is.
And again, put things in perspective. We're talking about Zillow and Zestimates. And for those of you who don't know, in the industry, I mean, among realtors, we all know that the values that come from Zillow tend to be highly inflated. So what Marc's alluding to is there are some people who just love, even though they have no intention to sell their property, logging into their Zestimate of their home because they see this inflated value. It makes them feel better, I guess.
Zestimate addiction, which is a real thing. I know so many people that check Zestimates on a weekly, sometimes on a daily basis, because they want to see what prices are doing, especially when it comes to their property. Now, with that in mind,
I guess it's like checking stock and going, look, my stock went up a lot.
Yeah,
I haven't
exactly.
sold it, but it went up a lot.
Yeah, the problem though is many people don't understand how the Zestimate really works. Now, I'm not saying we understand exactly how it works. It's Zillow's algorithm that
it changes.
is and it constantly changes. But even Zillow knows that their algorithm is not accurate. In fact, they have a yearly competition on who can come up with a more accurate Zestimate.
The other aspect of this too is you got to understand Zillow's business model was to attract owners who might be looking to sell, right? So they log in, they check the value. Usually when an owner is asking about a value, it's because they're interested in selling. So they make their money not from people checking their value, but by connecting that person, checking their value to a realtor who will buy that lead. So of course, if you're thinking about selling, you want to give a person a slightly inaccurate value. And again, that point will be important to segue back into what we're talking about. And so when you log in, you check your value. Oh, look, my property's worth more. I never thought about selling it, but now I really might. Zillow makes that money by selling that lead or contact of the owner to a realtor willing to buy it. So that was their primary focus before. And so that's how their Zestimates or their algorithms are put in. So it's kind of counterproductive if you think about it.
Now, when Zillow first started, they had very few resources to actually pull up comparables because no one had heard of Zillow, and Zillow was trying to make connections with multiple listing services that agents use in order to list properties and keep the data of closed sales. So for Zillow, when they first started, many of their resources for closed sale data came from the public tax records. The problem with that is public tax records are updated as sales, but may also include refinances within these sales. And so it was very inaccurate. So for those of you that remember Zestimates way back in the day when they first launched it, they were horribly inaccurate to the point where they had to admit that there was a margin of error by 40%.
Yeah. So now fast forward to today where you have this really high-powered CEO who is selling his property, but because Zillow actually went the opposite direction. They actually priced it significantly less than what he actually had it listed on the market for, which of course then makes it difficult to sell his multi-million-dollar property, and that individual decides to sue Zillow.
Now, now this is going to segue into the future of appraisals, because I think because Zillow is every year doing a competition on how do they come up with the best Zestimate, right? And in fact, there were two gentlemen that won that got some big prize, like 600 grand or something like that. It was a big prize for them, and they were able to narrow down that margin of error.
Yeah,
But
their product is slowly getting better, just because, as I started out talking about, their values were a little inflated. So I'm sure that word's gotten back to them, and they finally decided that, well, then maybe we should start slowly cleaning up our algorithm to get a better price that's more accurate. And they're slowly getting there, but they're not quite there yet.
I wonder why they haven't invested in the AI bots or buying a company that has AI bots. There's companies out there where, and this is new technology coming out, you have Fannie Mae and various lenders already testing automated appraisals. Basically what happens is you as the appraiser or the property owner will go through and take interior photos of your entire property. This AI bot is able to identify all your upgrades: tile, granite, tile flooring, laminate, carpet, type of paint. The bot goes through and identifies all these quality upgrades, and then it uses that to compare to other sales and those type of upgrades, and then it's able to do an automated appraisal. So essentially wiping out the needed appraiser to go through the property, take photos, and do this fancy report.
And thank goodness Skynet is sending out those types of appraiser bots as opposed to killer cyborgs trying to wipe us out.
Okay, topic number 3. Compass buys Alain Pinel. So this is making big news because Compass is a tech company and real estate company that's been growing, exploding very fast. They're buying a lot of companies. They're somewhat famous for also doing signing bonuses of upwards to $1 million for real estate agent teams to come on board. And these are signing bonuses. They're not special commission deals or anything. So they've really been growing really fast. Now, recently, they also announced that for 2019, they're going to stop getting into new market territories, new markets. They've grown up pretty fast. They want to now focus on the current markets that they're already in. And so here in the Bay Area, they decide to buy Alain Pinel, which is another very big brokerage.
And just to kind of put things in quick layman perspective, big company out of New York, backed with a lot of money, is buying up privately held offices or franchises throughout the United States. And again, focusing in California in this particular instance, their last acquisition was Alain Pinel, which has several thousand agents. And so they're essentially rebranding.
They also bought Pacific Union was another one. And I want to say they bought another one, some other big company too. But Pacific Union, Alain Pinel, definitely the big two companies. Now, the interesting thing is there was a study that came out that the very first year an agent is with Compass, their business drops by 17%. So I'm curious to see what happens to Compass coming down the road, because if the average agent that joins Compass loses 17% of their business, the one thing that's very typical with many real estate agents is once their business suffers a little bit, they're already thinking, well, what other broker can I go to that can help improve my business?
Yeah, to kind of segue off of what Marc is saying there. So, it's not a new thing for companies or large companies to buy out smaller companies. You see tech companies do it all the time. Google buying up a company because they hold some specific proprietary technology that'll make Google more money. And so when you apply that to the real estate industry, one big office buying out a whole bunch of other offices. And again, this isn't the first time this has happened before. You do it under the premise that the agents are doing really, really well. Well, agents are humans, and for lack of a better word, most agents can be very, very flaky, and they're very, very temperamental. So one moment they love their office that they're at, but there's always the grass is greener on the other side. So it's real easy to get in the business and get out of the business, or to just jump from one office to the other. So what that has to do with one big company buying the assets of a smaller company to grow its holdings, and those assets being real estate agents who are subject to human emotion and change, and as Marc said, going from one place to another. Personally, I've always wondered, why that's a smart move. Because if I had a bunch of money, I wouldn't go out and buy real estate companies with agents, knowing full and well that one moment an agent might love their office that they're in, and then the next moment, like we've talked about before, they're like, hey, they've got that new software, and did you see what that office is doing for them? And their donuts are better, and I'm going to go over there, right?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because if you look at the culture of Compass, it's very different than the culture of Alain Pinel. I think the culture of Pacific Union with Compass kind of matches up,
right?
But Alain Pinel is very different culture, and so it's going to be interesting to see what their agents do. If they end up dropping off or they end up splitting up, because I believe Alain Pinel originally started by a split off of a big Coldwell Banker office in San Francisco.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, the story behind Alain Pinel was the original broker named, Alain. He actually was getting out of the business, but his name was purchased, and it was taken over completely by somebody else. It'd be like if, Marc Guzman Real Estate, and then you decide to get out of the business and go into a totally different industry, but I buy your name and I just keep promoting that name, and because it was an offshoot of another company. Again, going back to like some of the allure of these new companies, a lot of them will offer great new technology. But the fact of the matter is that when you apply different technology, real estate agents, especially because we're self-employed contractors, we technically make our own hours. We love to know about all this latest software, but how much we actually use it is the big question. A lot of times I've had or introduced new software to the agents, and I can track and see just how much they're using them, and most of the time they're really not. Agents have their own little idiosyncrasies and will gravitate to whatever it is that they feel most comfortable with.
Okay. Bell was slightly a little different this time, but
having issues.
Okay, so next topic is tips for building and maintaining business relationships in real estate. So, Brian, you've been in business now how many years?
28 years, and this is going into my 29th year now.
Okay. What's been probably the number one key advice or tool that you use to build and keep relationships?
Well, there's a lot of different perspectives when you ask this particular question. Like, how do you build long-term relationships if you're an investor, right? And you're dealing with a lot of agents, or if you're an agent dealing with investors, or if you're an agent dealing with first-time buyers. So part of that, to answer that question, I'm going to have to focus in on one at a time. But with the idea of building long-term relationships, just from a realtor perspective, again, from my perspective, it's always been giving good advice and free advice that will always ultimately help the client. So, for example, most of the time when client comes to me, and again, I'm kind of going to speak from example, because I have clients that I literally work with for the last 15 years, and I've seen their kids like when they were babies, and now they're like 19, 20 years old, graduating from college. And my primary relationship with them has always been selling and helping them sell and buy investment real estate, which always segues into maybe a primary residence, or helping them to build their assets, like sell them a fourplex and then resell that fourplex a year or two later, trade it into an eightplex, sell that eightplex a year or two later, 3 years later, trade it into a 12plex. So when you're building that long-term relationship with anybody, a lot of it is being able to look at deals objectively. So there's times where I'm going to tell my client, don't buy that property. We did the inspections, or we looked at the rent rolls, or we discovered there was something wrong, it's going to stop us from what your original plan was with the property, be it rent control, or be it the house is falling in. So if you're in a position where you can tell someone not to do something, even though it's going to cost you your commission, then that's always been a real cool tool for me to just maintain that relationship because they realize that I'm a straight shooter and I'm very honest. I'm not going to do something just so I can make a quick buck.
Yeah, I think people nowadays can definitely see through that through the typical salesman tactic, right?
Right.
Where they know you're gonna make money off of it, but when they kind of feel something off and you're just pushing them to make a sale happen, they see right through that these days, I
Yeah.
think. For me, I think it's been really about being as knowledgeable as you can about what you do. Just being the, like, it's kind of cliche, but being the expert. But a lot of people say that, throw it around, but I'm talking about really being the expert. Like, one thing I did when I first got into selling real estate is I had no clue about the contracts, disclosures, yet I had a license, right?
Well, every
And
one of us comes into the business with a license with no clue.
so what I did was I did something that probably 99% of agents do not do. I sat down and I read word by word the entire purchase contract and every required disclosure. Then I highlighted things I did not understand and I went to an attorney friend and had them break it down for me. And so basically, I then understood the contract as much as possible, better than most real estate agents. And at that point, I was able to guide my clients and actually advise them on, well, if you need a bit more time, here's what we can do. Basically, finding little loopholes or using it as negotiation tactics to get your client the best price possible. So, and that's kind of been something that has transitioned with me into property management. What I do today is that I will talk to someone and overwhelm them with so much information about their property to the point where sometimes they don't want to do business with me because they're like, this is too much information, and they realize, hey, I'm going to do it by the book. And sometimes they may not want to, and that's fine. They can go manage their own property or hire someone else that won't. But just overwhelming people with information does two things. Either, I mean, you end up finding people that really want to work with you because you're the expert and you prove it. And you really build a lot of trust because they now know how knowledgeable you are.
So just segueing off of what you're saying, and I said earlier, giving them good advice. Good advice will be different for each person. And so you have to tailor that advice to your audience. So one of the things to keep those long-term relationships is, for example, if you're dealing with an investor, what are tax laws that will benefit them specific to real estate? Who are accountants who understand real estate investors and where can you turn to? Because there's going to be a plethora of questions. And so providing that type of good advice and telling them how to get from point A to point B through leverage and understanding what actual cap rates, ROIs, IRRs are, and what that means to them. Because a lot of times you could just read off definitions to people, not put them in perspective as to what that means to them. Or something as simple as buying a home. Here's tax laws for owner occupancy that'll benefit you, and here's how you can use that to leverage into something 2 years from now, 3 years from now that'll better yourself. A lot of people don't realize the nest egg that they're sitting on just with their single family home. And so when you put that into perspective for them, they know that, hey, 2 years later, 3 years later, they're going to call you back up. I don't send out birthday cards or Christmas cards. I literally say, here's what our goal is now, here's where we want to be, and we're going to check in every 3 to 6 months to say that you're on track. And that's always kept them coming back, and you build that long-term relationship.
Okay, so now we're getting to the property analysis portion of the show, and we have a fourplex in Richmond that we're going to analyze here. So, Brian, I'll let you take it from here. What property do we have?
So this is a fourplex in Richmond. Again, we don't really drop addresses, but anytime you are curious about a property, feel free to reach out and email us. This is a 4-unit building in Richmond, and it was built in 1951, older property. It actually qualifies not only for investor, non-owner occupied financing, which is 25% down, but it also qualifies for an FHA 3.5% down. So for the sake of time, we're just going to go from the investor analysis standpoint of a 25% down. So here you have a property that's 4 units, comprised of 2 bedroom, 1 bath, with these existing current rents, not pro forma rents, mind you. And you'll see that the rents are all across the board. You'll see that they're at 1313, 2100, 1400 and 1494. Now, 2100 is a good indicator of what the fair market rent should be, right? And so when you start to break it down, and here's a picture of the fourplex, you'll notice that it's got different, it's got a little deck. The exterior you'll see is a little older. Again, it's a 1951 building. And you always want to make sure you get inspections for all of these things. But when you start to go through some of the interior shots, you'll see that it's a very well-maintained property with new appliances, nice finishings from floors to walls and kitchen. Just taking a couple of quick shots of the kitchen here and the quality of remodel along with the bathrooms, right? Now, of course, let's jump into the spreadsheets, which I always like to go into. So the property, this fourplex, is asking $749,000. When you take into consideration a 25% down plus closing cost, and then the security deposit credits along with any city transfer tax, you're going to be in a position of having to buy the property for right about $206,034.50 out of pocket. Now, that all said, we're going to remember that number because it's going to be important when we're determining your ROI. So at $749,000, the first thing you're always going to hear me talk about is cap rate, cap rate, cap rate, because that's the very first denominator to determine if it's a good property or not. Now, the market cap in Richmond is roughly between 6 and 6.5, meaning smart investors are buying a property and making at least a 6% to 6.5% return on their money if they bought it all cash. So again, you take those rents that we talked about earlier, that equals $6,307 a month, $75,684 a year. You don't use that total income. You go down to just the, you always take a vacancy factor. So you're only using 95% of that income, otherwise known as the effective income. And from that, you're comparing it against its actual expenses. Now, expenses, as I've talked about in previous videos, consist of actual utilities, a management fee. In this case, we're using 5%. And this is regardless if you're going to manage it yourself or not, because this is how a bank's going to look at it. You're going to always look at your new taxes. So again, you'll see here, if you look very closely, the ad valorem rate, which you could pull from public records, the current bonds, and then a proposed insurance. So roughly speaking, I came up with roughly 36.16% of the effective income as the expenses. So long as you're within a 30 to 40% margin or percentage of the effective income towards expenses, then you know you're right on the right track. Sometimes you'll see pro formas that are only advertising at 22 or 25%. A lot of times that's what you call fluffing, right? It'll make the property.
What's the average that you see?
32 to 35%.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, it depends on the age of the building. Yeah. So sometimes you'll see, again, either it's too low or it's too high, then something is wrong. Either the management is terrible and they're just like juicing the owner for every little nook and cranny they can get out, or the agent is making the property look like it just runs like clockwork, nothing ever breaks, and you're going to have this great return. So again, when you apply a 36.16 expense ratio or OPEX against the effective income, what you get is $3,824.95 a month. That annualizes to $45,899 a year, right? And again, this is before making a principal and interest payment, otherwise known as debt service. So you apply $45,899 a year to a $749,000 asking price, and you get a 6.13% return, right? Now, that's a good sign right there that you're on the right track. Then you also take into consideration what are the market rents for this. In other words, if I raised all the rents to what they should be, then they should be closer to like an average of like $2,100 to $1,650. Again, I start to increase the rent from a $6,307 to $6,600 a month. That small little difference of 4.439, which is your loss to lease, that single value right there increases your cap rate from 6.13 to 6.55. Now, what does this mean with respect to market cap? Well, if people are on the average buying at a 6% return and you're slightly higher than that, then you know that the property is going to be worth more than what you're actually buying it for. And as you slowly raise your rents and increase your cap rate, but people are still willing to buy at a lower cap rate, then you increase your value again. The quick net effect of that is if you go to 0.6, A simple 4.43% increase in rent raises your value from $749,000 to as much as $817,730.68. That's what the market would bear as a result of higher rents. All right. Again, you take that, and we'll go to slide 2.
Now, real quick, why would a person looking to buy an investment property want to buy in Richmond, a city that has rent control, compared to a different city that doesn't have rent control like St. Pavel?
Very, very good question. So it really depends on the property. When you're approaching Richmond that does have rent control, and this applies for Oakland or San Francisco, you want to approach with an additional level of caution, primarily because you want to look at the attrition rate of the tenants. Does it look like they're going to be in there for the next 20 years, right? Or is the tenant base something that's going to be moving out within 2 years or 3 years as a result of buying a home? You also want to look at what the market rent, what the actual rents are on the place, right? Because there are some places in Richmond where the actual rents are so low where you're going to want to not buy there. It just so happens in this particular instance, the rents are close enough to market where it actually is justifying the price, right? Because you'll see that a lot of times agents will just look at what the last property sold for, use that as a comparable solely on its purchase price, irrespective of what its net operating income is, which is a result of the actual income that it generates, right? So if you've got lower income, then the value of the property should be less. And so that's why in like the previous episode, there was another fourplex at a similar price point, but the rents were lower, probably because the tenants had been there for a long time. And so because of those rents being lower, it was like a very low 3 cap, right? And so it was an immediate negative return.
Yeah, when you did the analysis, I think you said it was worth like 360,
right,
390. It was for sure under 400,000.
Yeah. So in order to actually make a 6% return, I would have to buy that property for 363,000 is what the net effect is, right? So now you take that cap rate and then you apply, or you take that the cap rate and the net operating income before debt service, and you apply, well, what if I had debt service? Because again, chances are you're not going to buy this property cash. So as a smart investor, you're something that you're not going to live in and you couldn't qualify as an owner-occupant financing, you're going to typically look at putting 25% down. So if you put 25% down and you finance 75% of the value at a interest rate of say 4.8, what you get is a monthly payment or principal and interest payment, and you'll see this in point 2, of $2,947.31. That's your principal and interest payment. The number above that is just the interest-only portion of that payment, $2,247. So when you look at the difference between $3,824 a month and a mortgage payment of $2,947, you get a cash flow of $877.65. You annualize that number over, it turns into $10,531. And again, remember earlier we talked about how much money you would need to acquire this. And I said $206,000 approximately. So if you have an income of $10,531 a year over $206,000, that's a 5.11% ROI or cash on cash. And so if your money or $206,000 was sitting in the bank, would it be earning 5.11% interest rate? Quick answer, no. Mutual fund, quick answer, no, right? Then, so that's your cash on cash. But it goes a little bit further because you got to remember there's principal reduction. And principal reduction is actually income also because you're paying your mortgage balance down and creating an equity between its value and what you owe. So when you apply the delta, in this case about $200, which is between $29.47 and $22.47, which is your interest-only payment, that $200 annualizes to additional income. So your $10,531 a year is really $18,935 a year, or a 9.19% ROI. So again, if you're earning $18,935 on your $206,000, which is what your down payment and closing costs were, minus any credits for security deposit and whatnot, you're making 9.19% on your money. Again, would you do that in a bank or a mutual fund? Quick answer, no. And again, here's the beauty of real estate is that in any other investment vehicle, you don't have depreciation. So if you sold stock and you made a profit, you'd have to pay immediate tax on it. Well, here you can clearly see a profit of $18,935, and you see a little negative number there, $21,789. That's your depreciation. Quick story: you take 80% of of your cost basis. That's the value of the actual improvement or the building. The land, which is roughly 20%, you can't depreciate. You take that 80% figure, you divide that over a 27.5-year period for residential, and you get $21,789 that you can apply as depreciation against the $18,935 of taxable income. And so what you have is a negative $2,853 on paper. So you don't pay tax on the $18,000. But as you raise those rents and you begin to climb from $18,935 to $22,000 a year, thereby increasing your 9.19 ROI to 10.73, again, because now you're earning $22,099.84 on your $206,000 down and closing acquisition, you still have that $21,789 a year of depreciation for the next 27.5 years to apply. And so you're roughly getting taxed on $310.75.
So the final question is it a buy or is it a pass?
It's a buy.
Perfect. So thank you for watching another episode of Keeping It Realty. Go back and subscribe. Subscribe on iTunes, Facebook, any other channel that you listen to podcasts. We're also on iHeartRadio and Spotify. And then, for the people wondering why I also have a Star Wars T-shirt on, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. And guess what?
Why didn't you tell me? I could have worn mine. We could have coordinated.
And guess what? Today marks 1 year that the final season, final episode of Star Wars Rebels, the TV show, ended.
Oh, really?
Yes. And everyone online is sharing their best moments. And the best moment was final episode where the ending of Darth Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi, their battle ends.
Oh my! You know what's crazy? I actually ran into one of the writers of that show on a plane on a Southwest airline on my way to Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con.
For Rebels?
For Rebels, yeah. So we became Facebook friends, and I try to pull out information ahead of time, but he's always really tight-lipped. But I love that show. It's a great show.
Yeah. So again, thank you for watching. Thank you to East Brother Beer for being the show's sponsor, and we'll catch you on next week's episode.
Again, please reach out to us if you have questions and want to ask any questions about any other properties. Stay tuned till next week.